let us continue our series making the case for Israel as the Jewish people's homeland. We are going through, for the next few weeks, the biblical record, starting in 2000 BC with Abraham, and going all the way through to just past the era of the New Testament, so another generation beyond the closing of the New Testament canon. We begin with covenants, specifically the Abrahamic covenant. We saw Abraham coming, and we saw the 6 iterations of the Abrahamic covenant given in Genesis 12 and in 15 and in 17 and 22. We've seen the birth of Ishmael and the fact that the covenant is not going through Ishmael. We have seen that the covenant goes through Isaac, not through Ishmael, even though Ishmael is receiving some blessings. It's not the covenant. We see the birth of Isaac and how important it is to very, very clearly be transmitted through the child Isaac. And then we saw the sacrifice, or the near sacrifice, of Isaac when he was bound, and the 6th iteration of the Abrahamic covenant, the 6th expansion of the Abrahamic covenant. We see the death of Sarah, and the only reason to have mentioned the death of Sarah was because the scripture is so emphatic that Abraham bought land. Abraham didn't own any of the land. He was a Bedouin, a traveler, sojourner. But he buys this particular plot, which has a cave where his wife is buried. We see in Hebron, which is there just across to the west of the Dead Sea there. We see at the death of Abraham that he is buried in that plot of land, in that cave, Machpelah, with his wife Sarah, and that Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury their father, and while both sons had 2 very different destinies and inheritances, they both recognized that Abraham owned that particular plot of land. He had purchased it for 400 shekels, and that of all the land that was promised to the Jewish people, that was the only actually owned piece in this land. We then see Isaac having the Abrahamic covenant reiterated to him in Genesis 26. And then we're going to meet now Jacob. Now, we saw this very same passage this morning in our Torah study. Remember, the ladder, the angels of God were ascending and descending on ladder to heaven. And God reiterates to Jacob that which we discussed this morning, that he is the God of his ancestors, and the land belongs to Jacob and to his descendants, and the descendants will be numerous, uncountable, like the dirt in the land or the dust of the earth, and his descendants will spread out in every direction, and in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. That promise in the Abrahamic covenant, that it's not just about the Jewish people. This is not just an internal covenant dealing with internal matters regarding Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their progeny. This is an international project, a covenant of lasting and widespread repercussions. And somehow in you, Jacob, and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So there is international impact through the nation, what will become the nation of Israel. And that impact is good. It's pleasant. It's blessing, not cursing. It's blessing. That through the Jewish people, every nation on earth, all the families of the earth will find blessing. It's an extraordinary promise. Within a complex of extraordinary promises, this great covenant. But I've emphasized now, this is now the third week, I've emphasized, and I hope you see not what I'm stressing, but what I'm highlighting is that Torah, Genesis, is stressing the importance of the land, the intrinsic, essential component of the Abrahamic covenant of God's promises and his relationship to the Jewish people from the very beginning is built upon land promises. That's not all the promises that are in, obviously, but the land promises are foundational. Jewish people, for generations, for millennia, have described the Jewish people as there are three pillars to the Jewish people, to Jewishness. And that is land and God and Torah. Because Torah provides the legal foundation under which the land is given to the Jewish people. You can see how people get confused about this or want to reject this if they do not believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If they believe in another God or no God at all, then this theological foundation doesn't seem to make any sense or hold any weight to them. But most assuredly, since we are establishing not only theology, but history, the historic record is incontrovertible. Whatever you think about theology, God, no God, the record is clear. Torah is very clear and has contained the foundational essence of land to Jewish identity. Well, let's continue. That was Genesis 28, verses 12 and 15. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. Jacob could go wherever he's going to go. He goes to Padan Aram. He goes up to Mesopotamia. But he's not going to stay there. That's not his destiny. Same way that the Jewish people were able to sojourn. They went down to Egypt. But that was not their destiny. The Jewish people's destiny always, and Torah is very clear on that wherever you go, eventually the lodestone will be, you will return back to go. You will go back to this land. I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. 7 chapters later, Jacob is coming down. He has gone to Padan Aram, is now returning to the land that God said, I'll bring you back. And in verse 9 of chapter 35, God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. Now, by this time, Jacob's perspective has grown. He has matured, and he's grown more wise. He's grown more wise in the ways of God. It's not the rash, young and brash young guy. If you do A, B, C, D, and E for me, and you'll be God. And I'll give you 10%. I'll cut you in. 10% for the big guy. But God appears, and he blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob, is Yaakov, but you will no longer be called Yaakov, supplanter. But Israel shall be your name. It's interesting. I mean, Jacob's called supplanter because he was holding on to the heel of his twin brother Esau in the womb and comes out holding on to the heel. Supplanter. Many millions of people, they still think of Israel today, of the Jewish people today, as supplanters. They have fancy university words like colonizers, blah, blah, blah. But they are not, Israel is not supplanter. Is not Jacob anymore. Israel, the one who wrestles with God. You remember the story. Israel wrestling with God said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And so the very name Israel, he that wrestles with God. I don't know a better description of the Jewish people than their very own name. But Israel shall be your name. Thus he called him Israel. God also said to him, I am El Shaddai, I am God Almighty. I'm the God who is in charge of matters of fertility. Therefore, I'm telling you, be fruitful and multiply. If you don't be fruitful and multiply, then you make me a liar, right? Because nations will come from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Kings, innumerable descendants. I'm God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you. And kings will come forth from you. And yet again we see the Abrahamic covenant reiterated for the third generation. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you. And I will give the land to your descendants after you. What land? Same land that was promised to Abraham, the land of Canaan, which by this time, still 3 generations in, the only actual piece of land that is owned is Machpelah, the burial ground of Abraham and Sarah. And Isaac, actually. The land which I give to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you. I will give the land to your descendants after you. Now, fast forward, end of Genesis, the whole Joseph story. Everybody's back down in Egypt. It was down in Egypt. Now they've relocated because of the famine and because of Joseph's great position, and including Jacob. There's only 70, 75 Hebrews at the time. The family, but the family is growing and growing fast. But Jacob dies. And when the time for Israel to die drew near, he, Israel, Jacob, called for his son Joseph and said to him, please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh. We saw this very same thing with Abraham and his servant back in earlier in the Torah, when Abraham was sending his servant to go find a wife for Isaac, right? Put your hand in a meaningful place and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. This is not a untoward gesture. This is a very solemn kind of vow. Putting your money where it matters. Deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. What's the favor that this guy's got to put his hand under his thigh and make this pledge? Here it is. Here's the favor. Please do not bury me in Egypt. But when I lie down with my fathers, when I kick off, in other words, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. Hebron, Machpelah. Then Israel said to Joseph, chapter 48, that was 47, next chapter in, Israel hasn't yet died. Israel said to Joseph, behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. Joseph is a big shot in Egypt. But yet Jacob can see, just as Jacob is in Egypt and is going to die in Egypt, but is going to be brought back and buried in Israel, in the land of promise, so too Joseph will die in Egypt, but will be brought back to the land of his fathers. And then in Genesis 49, 29 through 32, almost to the end, one chapter left to go, Jacob says, he charged them and said to them, to his sons, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave. This should be familiar language because we've seen it so many times with Abraham and then throughout. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. It's the only piece of land that they own. In the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. It's got to be like the 8th or 9th time that that's mentioned just in that language, maybe more, in the book of Genesis. And there they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah. There I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Heth. You know, Moses is not writing this just to be repetitive. He already said it was purchased from the sons of Heth way back earlier when Sarah died. Mentioned it several times. Why does he keep mentioning it? Because it's relevant, and it keeps being relevant to the Jewish people for perpetuity's sake, certainly to the Israelites coming out of Egypt, reading Genesis, the first readers of Genesis. It is very, very important for them to understand that before they conquer a land that has only been a land of promise to them, that they understand that there's at least one piece that has been purchased outright that is legally owned by the Jewish people. And in chapter 50, when Jacob dies, we see in verse 12, thus his sons did for him as he had charged them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which, and you can write this yourself, you know exactly what it's going to say, which Abraham had brought along with the field for a burial site, from whom? Ephron the Hittite. So many times it's repeated. One of the final things that's mentioned in the last chapter of Genesis. But then, of course, we have the death of Joseph. And watch this. Understand, possess the perspective that not only Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had, but what their children had as well. Watch what Joseph requests. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take care of you. and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath, covenant, Abrahamic covenant, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Joseph there in Egypt, even then, he has a very clear perspective. You're not going to be here forever. I'm going to die. I won't see it. But God is going to bring our people from Egypt, where, remember, they're doing very well in Egypt. He doesn't know, he doesn't understand the slavery that's coming, but nonetheless, he knows that their time in Egypt is limited because their destiny is entwined with the land that he promised on oath. God had promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Abrahamic covenant. And then Joseph, same passage. Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, he made his brothers swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you will carry my bones up from here. I'm going to be buried here. But when you make the transfer, however long it's going to be, and it's going to be some time, but when that happens, do not leave me here, right? Don't leave me under a pyramid. Don't leave me under a monument. Take my sarcophagus and its contents, and you carry, when you transfer to the promised land, you take my bones up from here. And that's indeed what they wind up doing. In fact, we see in the film, Ten Commandments, you see the sarcophagus of Joseph being carried from the land of Egypt. We see it as they're passing through the Red Sea, the waters of the Red Sea, and they maintain that sarcophagus until they get into the land of Canaan, and there then conquer, and then they bury Joseph just as he had requested. Now, Moses is very, very important because the transition from Genesis and from the three Hebrew patriarchs and even their son, the children of the tribes of Israel, the transition to Moses, arguably the key figure of Torah, is very important. Whether Moses, of course, Moses wrote the whole thing, but Moses very clearly retains the perspective that he establishes in Genesis and carries it through to Exodus. For example, when Moses encounters God at the burning bush, God says this to him. The Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters. For I am aware of their sufferings. Verse 8. So I've come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So before Moses is even charged with leading the people out of Egypt, God said, this is what I'm going to do. Now, you happen to be the guy through whom I'm going to do it, but this is my plan. It's always been my plan because the land belongs to the nation of Israel. And which land we know that this land flowing with milk and honey is indeed Canaan. This is the place. Let me tell you who's living there. And we've seen these same people in Genesis 15 listed with Abraham way, way back. Place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, the Mosquitobite, the Satellite, the Moabite, the Kryptonite, all the ites, right? It's the same identity, same land. Belongs to Israel. 3 chapters later, this is the section on which the 4 cups that we drink at Passover are established. These are the promises that God has given to Israel that we remember through 4 cups at Passover at the Seder. It says in verse 4, I've established my covenant with them. What covenant? It's not the Mosaic covenant. The Jewish people's ownership of the land is not based on the Mosaic covenant. It is based on the Abrahamic covenant. Moses recognizes that. I've established my covenant with them. Mosaic covenant is not yet given. They have not yet been brought to Sinai. The Mosaic covenant is not in the picture yet. To give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourned, in which 4 generations sojourned prior to Egypt. That land belongs to them, even though other people are living there, the Hivites, the Jebusites, etc., Canaanites. Furthermore, I've heard the groaning of the sons of Israel because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. What covenant? The Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is critical in understanding Genesis. It is also critical to understanding the motivation of God throughout Torah. Not only in Genesis, but also throughout, especially throughout Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and onward. I've remembered my covenant. Covenant that God remembers is the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the Mosaic covenant, which has not yet been given. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out, first cup, from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage, second cup. I will also redeem you, third cup, with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Fourth cup, that I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you will know that I am the God, the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land. What land? The land I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. What's the guarantee that you will possess this? Right? I am the Lord. It's the only guarantee you need. God is the guarantee for the Jewish people. Am I a broken record? Am I repeating? I'm not a broken record, but I am repeating one particular theme over and over again. And that's only because I'm quoting the Bible, which establishes this theme so strongly, so heavily interspersed throughout the Torah is the promise of the land. I am the Lord. And get to Exodus 32, golden calf. The children of Israel sinned. God says, I'm going to punish them. I'm really mad. Hold me back. Then Moses entreated the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? This is the crux of Abraham's argument. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants to whom you swore by yourself and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, and all this land which I have spoken I will give to your descendants, and they will inherit it forever. When God gets angry with Israel, all Moses does, he plays the Abrahamic covenant card. And that's very effective. It reminds God of the Abrahamic covenant and the promise to possess the land for Israel. Next chapter, God says to the Jewish people, I'm upset with you, I am. Here's what I want you to do though. Depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up from the land of Egypt to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. Once again, Abrahamic covenant quoted. It's pretty heavy. Now next week, we don't ever leave the Abrahamic covenant. We're not going from covenant to covenant to covenant. We are building from one covenant to the next. And we'll see in most cases there's a certain level of continuity, but when there is discontinuity, I will point it out. But next week, we are going to sneak preview. We're going to go to Leviticus. We've seen Exodus. We're going to Leviticus. So if you haven't been in Leviticus for a while, next week, I'll give you some time. Put your big boy pants on. We're going to go wading. Put your Leviticus waders in. We're going to wade into the waters of Leviticus and see what the Mosaic covenant has to say regarding the relationship of the land of Israel to the Jewish people. Spoiler alert, a lot of people will use the argument that's laid on these verses, will say, because Israel is disobedient, they have forfeited the right to belong to this land. They've given up their rights. We'll see exactly what these verses say, what they don't say, and what the relationship, if any, between the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, Israel's obedience or disobedience, and God's faithfulness. We'll see how they all interact together, and a beautiful picture of what God's plan and program for the Jewish people are. But between now and then, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you in suspense.